And let me tell you for a fact, as a startup or entrepreneur, there's absolutely no way you can build a perfect business. Yeah. It's impossible. It is absolutely impossible. The first 5 to 10 years of your business are full of mistakes. Full of mistakes. And that's why when you go cleaning up as you go. You go clean up as you go, you go clean up as you go. But it is impossible for you to come and say, okay, 5, 10 years ago you did this. And then you start, it doesn't work like that.
Fear, right? What has that meant to you?
One thing I never thought would be hard is the fact that I had to leave what was familiar to me, my family and all that, move into this country, and then all of a sudden I noticed that first of all, whatever I left there was not just family, it was a support system. So once you leave that behind, then you find yourself in this place, especially, so when you're going through entrepreneurship, you get to a point where room for you to give up is gone. So you're in too deep, so you cannot stop. Okay, so you say this has to kill me now. Yeah, so once you get there, that particular point, everything in your life changes. You have to change your mindset, you have to change every single thing. But the whole process is absolutely scary. But then eventually, everything starts making sense. I was telling people that 2024 is probably my best year because whatever I've been building for the last 10 years, I can actually see it now.
We can't ever replicate Silicon Valley, right, in Zambia or any other sort of ecosystem around the continent. However, we can build ecosystems around the continent that speak to the challenges that entrepreneurs are facing on the ground and need to be resolved. And I think therein then also lies quite a lot of opportunity. I think we were talking earlier about sort of when you look at the energy situation, right? Like Afshon has said, that is the same across different countries around the region, different markets around the region. If you can solve within a country a challenge that a population or users face, you can solve that same challenge elsewhere.
Good afternoon. We have the full audience here. And once again, the Ethereum company is back and we have the usual suspects and 2 additional guests. And this is going to prove to be a very interesting topic, I must say. We have a lot of discourse in front of us. We have a very special guest here, actually 2, but we'll start with the primary. I think I will let Wallace do the introduction for himself. I think someone does a better introduction by himself than someone else who is just paraphrasing. So, over to you, good sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
It's like this afternoon.
All right,
this
so
morning somewhere else.
Morning somewhere else. Yeah. My name is Wallace, Afshon Wallace, Ngige. An entrepreneur, born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya. I've been privileged to have moved around Africa, to be specific. Seen the environment in Africa, gotten inspired by Africa, and started startups in Africa for Africa by Africans. Yeah, so
the slogan right there.
Yeah, so my first startup was called 250 Taxi, which is a taxi hailing app.
Yeah. Okay.
We founded it in Rwanda, Kigali, Rwanda. I lived in Kigali, Rwanda for 5 years.
Yeah.
I was between 2010 and 2015, and then from there I was very inspired by all these mega companies coming into Africa, but this was imported tech, and then launching all these businesses, and I was like, you know what, there's something here that we can do and build here. That's why I got inspired to build that taxi hailing app, which eventually rebranded to AfriTaxi. And then from there, that's when Jumia was launching in Africa, and specifically East Africa. And they had launched Jumia Food, which was Hello Food at that time in Rwanda. And that's why I learned a lot about food delivery and all that. But I knew that's the business I wanted to go into, movement of stuff. First of all, food delivery or food basically just used to make people happy. And I wanted to get into the happy business. But I couldn't do it in East Africa because of 2 specific reasons. Number one, there was a lot of these big players, and I couldn't compete because first of all, the capital injection needed for you to keep up with such players was absolutely unbelievable. So I started looking for markets that could, so I told my co-founder on the side that we need to start building such a product, but we'll not launch it in Rwanda. We'll look for some random country where nobody exists, and then we'll go launch it there. And then I had built a network of friends, and some of my friends there were from Zimbabwe. So I said, you know what, I looked around and I saw the Southern African region, other than South Africa, was lacking some of this tech. So I picked Zimbabwe, first of all, because I knew it would be easy for me since I had friends there. So I wouldn't have to do it alone. And that's how I moved to Zimbabwe. I was there for 6 months, trying to build this thing called Afri-Food at that time. And as we were doing onboarding of restaurants and partners, we had approached a guy to be an investor at that time. And the guy told us, whatever you're doing here, I don't think it will work because of obvious reasons. Couldn't bring money in, couldn't take money out. It was just a political mess. And he suggested, why don't you try Angola or Zambia? At that particular point, I didn't know anything about Zambia. The only thing I knew was an artist called Roberto and a song called Lwatula. That's the only thing I knew. But then I remembered, I tell people this and they laugh about it. I remembered in 2012, which was about 3 years prior, had one of my friends, good friends of mine, tell me that he had a dream that I had a successful business in Zambia. Based on that, memory,
African juju.
I decided I'm going to gamble. I'm going to gamble on Zambia. Jumped on a flight, came to Zambia, was there for 3-4 days. Went back to Kenya, told my co-founder, I'm moving to Zambia. So it took quite a bit of time because we had to continue building the tech. We used to meet at a restaurant every day and just build the MVP that was enough for me to come and launch here. For those who don't know what an MVP is, it's a minimum viable product. It's basically the bare minimum that you need to get to market. And then I moved here, didn't know anyone, it was basically starting from zero. Booked an Airbnb, a room in a house. And my plan was to come here with a tech, look for a logistics partner that we could partner with, that already had something existing on ground. They would run that, then I would provide the tech and a bit of marketing support. But unfortunately, the players I found here didn't want that. I was like, you know what, eventually if you want to scale, you need the tech. So I'll be a tech partner, but they didn't want anything to do with that. And I said, okay, cool, let me just do it myself. I went, looked for a supplier called Tukutuku selling motorbikes. Went and paid half for 2 motorbikes, got them without number plates, put a sticker on them, and I launched Afri Delivery. So I launched it as Afri Food. But then as we continued, I noticed that we'll be limited by food. So we changed it from Afri Food to Afri Delivery. And it has evolved now to so many things which we'll discuss as we go. So in a nutshell, the executive summary of my story.
That was more than just a summary. That was an MBA. Literally crushed into like a couple of minutes. A good one, and it's good to have you here with us.
Thank you.
One of the things we always appreciate is the perspective of, first and foremost, an entrepreneur, because you embody all the traits that are critical to that, which is it requires you to move, you move. You have no boundaries that will define where you go and find business or do business, and you take the risk. So you are the perfect embodiment. So maybe a throw question as well would be, and we'd ask this openly here, would be maybe from the perspective of the policy environment that you met, and you named one, which is that when you came in as a technology partner, but found that most people didn't want that. So from that experience, what would be your words of wisdom, especially along the collaborative lines, for instance? Africa is emerging yet, so there's a lot of synergies that still exist, but we don't seem to be tapping into that. So what would be, in a few minutes, just a few coin words before I pass the mic on to someone else?
There's something I've come to understand, and I've come to understand this. I wouldn't say late, but I would say at the right time, especially about collaborations. So when we were growing up, and this is, I think, an idea that we have within our environments, we're taught that we have to hoard everything to ourselves.
Yeah.
Or we have to do everything ourselves.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as we grow, we see each other as competitors and not collaborators. Especially in this market, that, for example, like the biggest challenge I faced was the ecosystem never existed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I say the ecosystem never existed, is there were no logistics partners, there were no tech partners, there was nothing. There were no payment partners. I had to build the whole ecosystem up.
Yeah.
And if you look at our business now, we moved from a single product business to an ecosystem enabler.
Right.
So what I mean by that is we found ourselves in a space where we had to build that whole value chain, build logistics, build tech, build fulfillment, and all that.
Yeah.
But then companies coming behind us, startups, they were also trying to do the same.
Yeah.
So what we did is we saw that as a big opportunity and told them, you know what, you don't have to do all this stuff. We've got APIs that you can tap into, which means you can use our logistics. We've got tech that we pre-built for the last 10 years. You can build into this, you can tap into this tech.
Yeah.
We've got fulfillment centers so that if you're trying to achieve full efficiency, you don't have to figure out where you're going to pick your products from and to do deliveries. You can just put them in one center and you can utilize that center and distribute from there. The good thing is that the mindset has changed now.
Yeah.
So that mindset that I found back then, where people didn't want to move or didn't want to collaborate, has completely gone. So there's a new breed of startups coming that are just looking at what this startup is doing and what can I use from that. What this startup is doing, what can I use from that. And it's working. And whatever we have, for example, whatever I worked 10 years to achieve, you cannot achieve it in 2 years. So I think that has changed a lot, but it also comes with, number one, a lot of exposure. So we've seen that from the way some of our colleagues running these startups in Kenya did, in South Africa did. We're trying to implement the same. We all belong to the same circles, and the conversation now is, even our investors. I was very shocked to have a guest in my house, and I was talking about how this investor put in some money in our business, and he asked me for the last name. His last name is Debola. And then we came to realize that we actually have the same investor. So what investors are now doing is they're looking at all the startups they've invested in, and they're trying to see how can these startups work together to build something bigger. So I think now the conversation has changed, and now based on that, what we're doing as startups now is we're trying to see how we can collaborate together and approach investors as a collective, as one unit. We say, okay, these are the portfolio companies that we have. We are all working together like this. You can pick one or you can pick all, but at least you know that there's potential for you to, if you invest in this one, you're investing in that one too, and that one too, and that one too. So I think that has really changed in a very short time.
You know, my thing has always been, when people hear you speak like that, from that level where you're seeing the ecosystem from a house view, we kind of give off the picture like we started there, you know. So I always like to look into what tools can people get from Afshon so that they can see that this thing is possible. Like I'll tell you this, for our landscape, Afri-delivery had to happen to make all of these other delivery services happen. They won't admit it, but even if they had more funding than you, more tech than you, they had to see someone do it and succeed at doing it, you know. So you changed that for us. Like your coming did that for us. My thing is, you've been to Kenya, Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Zambia, maybe a few more countries.
I've been to Burundi, Congo.
Fear, right? A lot of people, I think, starting is the hardest, right? A lot of people will say things like, you use the fear to motivate yourself. The anxiety will always be there. What has that meant to you?
I keep telling people this, and I don't like lying about it. If I knew what I knew today about what I would have gone through, I wouldn't have done it.
Right.
The reason why I say that is because, first of all, it's so hard.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship at a high level is probably one of the hardest things you can ever go through as an individual. It takes everything from you.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, when I was doing it, when I was waking up going from country to country, I never saw it.
Yeah.
And I never felt it.
Yeah.
Until I was sitting somewhere in my house in Zambia, going through a storm, which is maybe 6-7 years later, and I was alone.
Yeah.
So first of all, you're alone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're in a space. You find yourself in a space where you, first of all, number one, you become your own cheerleader.
Yeah.
Because the level you're trying to get to, you're not there yet.
Yeah.
But then you're not where you used to be. So you're in this space where
Neither
just
here
you're
nor
clapping
there.
for yourself. Okay? And it's a dark place.
Yeah.
It's a dark place. It's a hard place. And for me, for example, one thing I never thought would be hard is the fact that I had to leave what was familiar to me, my family and all that.
Yeah.
Move into this country.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I noticed that first of all, whatever I left there was not just family, it was support system. Yeah.
Yeah.
So once you leave that behind and you find yourself in this place, especially, so when you're going through entrepreneurship, you get to a point where room for you to give up is gone.
Yeah.
So you're in too deep, so you cannot stop. Okay, so you say this has to kill me now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once you get there,
Yeah.
that particular point, everything in your life changes. You have to change your mindset. You have to change every single thing.
Yeah.
But the whole process is absolutely scary up to this point. You know, the success I've achieved, because I've been privileged to achieve quite a bit of success. It's still very, very scary. First of all, you don't know whether you wake up and it's gone.
Yeah.
You don't know whether what you're doing is right, because first, especially if you're the pioneer, so you're the one that's pushing the
The vision.
So you don't know whether you're the one you're going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
But then eventually, everything starts making sense.
Yeah.
I was telling people that 2024 is probably my best year. Because whatever I've been building for the last 10 years, I can actually see it now.
Yeah.
Whatever I was trying to convince investors 2-3 years ago, I can see some investors that said yes because they liked me.
Yeah.
They're like, this guy, it's okay, we can trust him. But now I can actually go and tell them that this is actually a business that we're building. But the fear, the stress, everything is there. But also one thing, the reason why I also do my podcast is because I want to tell people the truth.
Yeah.
The problem is we are not prepared mentally for whatever you're going to go through.
Yeah.
So we have glorified this entrepreneurship thing and made it seem more glamour and all, but it's extremely, extremely hard.
Yeah.
And we're not told that. So, and that's why it's easy for people to give up early, because then they think they've been lied to. But it's one of the biggest challenges you can decide to take onto yourself as a human being.
Yeah.
And you will lose a lot for so many years.
Yeah.
But it's important for you to accept that it's part of the process.
Yeah.
But the fear is there. I don't think the fear ever goes away.
Yeah.
Especially because you're always pushing boundaries unless you become comfortable.
Yeah.
Right.
But then entrepreneurship it's like a drug.
Yeah.
Once you get into it, just want, okay, what's next? What's next?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like, what kept you going?
Yeah,
you know?
So what's next? What's next? So I keep telling people, like, if I decide to stop now, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
But then I'm looking at what else can I do?
Yeah.
And you've given up all this time. It doesn't make sense to stop now.
Yeah.
But also what keeps me going. So when we started, we always used to say, what most people think is, we do this to make money.
Yeah.
Money is always a byproduct. It comes because of all the hard work and all the work you put in.
Yeah.
But then my mission as an entrepreneur changed when it became a purpose for me.
There you go.
So it's no longer just about me making money.
Yeah.
It's about my changing lives.
Yeah.
And I've been privileged enough to have stayed with, for example, in Zambia, people here for long enough to see an impact.
Yeah.
I can see someone that started working at Afri Delivery, the only thing they had is a piece of land.
Yeah.
Then I can see them starting to build. Eventually they finish, they moved in.
Yeah.
Their life has changed.
Yeah.
And if you look at that level of impact,
Yeah.
then you're like, you know what? Whatever I'm actually doing
Means something.
is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps you going. And eventually things just line up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm reading a book that Buff just had. I think it's just a quote to say why. I think that there must have been a story behind the why getting into this from the first place.
Yeah.
I don't have the why in like getting into entrepreneurship. It's really around survival sometimes. It's really around like, there's so many factors that make us become, but sometimes mostly commonly survival.
Yeah.
But for you to now get to this destination as to this drive, there must be that reason, right? But not the reason that you've talked about in terms of like impact, what you see now. But what was that reason that got you into that, I want to become an entrepreneur? Was it the status at home or?
So So when I was growing up, when I was very young, I was so most of these things are inspired by your environment.
Yeah.
Whatever you see and whatever you want to change.
Yeah.
And where I grew up, we didn't have electricity. We didn't have running water. And funny thing, there were two, and I keep telling people this. There were two commodities that were always being utilized. There was charcoal. There was paraffin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still works even now.
Yeah, and I always used to say, my mom keeps telling me this, that I always used to tell them how when I finish primary school, I want to set up my own kiosk.
Yeah.
To sell charcoal and paraffin to my neighbors.
Yeah.
And then grow it to a supermarket.
Yeah.
So it came out of a need to change something, which I think is the best place to get inspiration from. A need to change the community, but it's something that I was born with.
Right.
It's something that I was 100% born with. It's not something that you just acquire along the way. And then my sister was telling me the other day that, you remember when you were young, you used to dream of owning a small supermarket. Now you actually do. It's just on that. Yeah. But what I noticed is, as I got more exposure, as I got changed the environment, the dreams remain the same.
Yeah.
But the level of thinking or whatever I wanted to achieve changed. It started now resonating and being reflected by the environment that I was in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I move to an upper market neighborhood, I see people now want milk more, then I say, okay, I want to distribute milk.
Yeah.
If I see now people want, it depends on the environment that you're in.
Yeah.
But the core purpose remains the same.
Yeah.
For the betterment of people's lives and the community as a whole.
Yeah.
Great. And I think just to follow up on that, like what has kept you going? Obviously 10 years in the game plus, that's a lot of longevity. And that's a lot of battles that you have to fight, off of
true,
like new
actually.
entrants and whatnot coming into the market. So what has kept you guys going?
What kept me going is a lot of stuff. Actually, when I think about it now, it's a combination of very many things. What kept me going was, first of all, when I kept moving, I started getting a lot of people involved. So every time I thought of giving up, I'm like, I'm not just giving up on myself.
Right.
I'm giving up on these people too. My family is there cheering me on, especially my family. My co-founders are there telling me we can do this, we can do this. And then eventually I got investors. I was lucky to have very good supportive investors that would tell me they used to worry more about me personally,
Yeah.
and they would clearly show that they care more about me
Yeah.
than
your
the
returns.
business.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, you know what? At some point, I remember one of my guys said, you know what? You can take a trip, go somewhere. I'll pay for you. Just stay there for a week and get your head straight. Because at some point, I'd got into really bad depression.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, you're like, you know what? All these people that, and also my employees. My employees are like crazy.
Yeah.
And it became a combination of so many things.
Yeah.
But then also what keeps me going is when you see something work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When you try something and it works,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to work at a very huge scale.
Yeah.
But if it works,
Yeah.
that's enough motivation for you to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hive Co-working Lusaka offers a dynamic and innovative workspace that blends entrepreneurial culture with a state-of-art facilities. It caters to various needs with flexible hot desks, dedicated desks, private offices, and meeting rooms. Additional perks include high-speed internet, free beverages, secure parking, and access to a vibrant community. So if you want a free day pass or a tour of this place, just use the link in the description below.
So on that point, I just realized that we had like a mystic guest ask a question, and I was wondering like, who's the guy in the mustard shirt asking a question? This is like Five and Company now. No, I think we felt it relevant that part of this conversation wouldn't be complete without having our brother Mulumba with us. And yeah, I'll take Chinedu's lead and let Mulumba introduce himself. And some of the things that he's doing. George?
Just must I say that one blends in very well with the background.
Have you noticed?
Architecture.
It's like he planned this.
When I left the house, I was going to have delivery.
You watched the last podcast. You're like,
Both have colors.
Right.
so Mulumba, go for it, man.
Awesome. So my name is Mulumba Lwatula, technologist at heart, and I've been a startup founder, entrepreneur, peacekeeper, to now investor over the last 10 years. I've also recently become an angel investor. And I think through the ecosystem, I've worked with quite a number of different startups, entrepreneurs, mentoring and the like. But I decided to formalize that over the past couple of years. I think after being away from the country for nearly 23 years, and now being back for the last 10 years, I thought, this is time for me to start giving back as well. So,
Wow. Where did you go for 23 years?
Dude, I was all over. I mean, we left, I think, in '93, moved to New York, 3 years there, then I moved to Ethiopia. Graduated high school in Ethiopia, moved back to the US for university, then I came back here for a 6-month stint before moving to Liberia to go join the peacekeeping mission in Liberia. I spent about 3 years there. I was working with the UN. I joined the UN system. Initially as a volunteer, then I left that post, came back to Zambia for a few months before then heading to South Africa for work with the UN again for about 5 years. Then moved to New York headquarters for 3 years before then finally coming back to Zambia, and I've been in the investment space since.
Ever since then.
Yes.
You're like luggage. It's like luggage moves stamp, luggage moves stamp. Hey, I wanted to say, I think it would not do justice to mention that Afshon has a podcast called Unconventional Mentorship, right?
No. Uncomplicated.
Uncomplicated Mentorship. Yeah.
Which kind of convention?
Afshon is very unconventional, so he is not very uncomplicated. So Uncomplicated Mentorship. Follow that, watch it. Lots of subject matter experts on that. And the point, he talked about it. It's really just uncomplicating this mentorship and showing people that there's people that's gone before and done this thing. It's doable. But even more than that, collaboration is power. So I wanted to mention that. And also why that ties in with Mulumba is because also Mulumba also had a podcast. Are you able to talk about that for a bit? And when are you restarting it? I mean, that's
Pressure. I mean, so I've got a co-host of mine, Taffy. We host the Scale Up Africa podcast, which was a podcast to build resilient African entrepreneurs and businesses. The podcast essentially stemmed from the COVID-19 period, right? We wanted to, I think, gets to talk to a number of entrepreneurs across the continent. And what we did then was just tap into our networks and start talking to people about how they were coping, firstly, with the pandemic. Then post that, then started sort of expanding to them telling their stories of adversity, the entrepreneurial journey, obviously being quite arduous for a lot of people. But then also, I think within those stories, you find hope. And the fact that, you know, if you can learn from other peers who've gone before you, it becomes an easier process for you, right, going forward. So that was the thrust really behind the Scale Up Africa podcast, and now setting it up then.
Right. Cherry.
Well, so since we have the two heavyweights in the ring, I think it makes sense as well to probably throw a question that they can both help us perceive. So we have Wallace on one side, basically gave us his soap story, and that's a movie for Hollywood, by the way. Seriously, you know,
That's
I was
like,
just
that's like 10% of it. Exactly. There's more.
that was a condensed 10%, by the way. I was just 1 minute shy of just tearing up. I like, no, hold your horses here. And so the fact for me is that we have these two titans here, perspective of having had first African experience, entrepreneurship experience as well, also understanding the dynamics of culture and tie-in. So maybe a question thrown, maybe you start with you, Wallace, and then eventually he will piggyback on that. So your journey in terms of entrepreneurship, there is, as he says, a method to the madness, so to speak, you know, and it is not something that has a whole lot of people who understand it. That's why you spoke about the loneliness you feel, because who else do you talk to, especially when you're in a foreign place and all. So the question is, from that perspective of being a Kenyan, having gone around a couple of African countries which you named, what is the one common defining feature from an entrepreneurial point of view that you've seen, whether you look at it from the lens of this is a common problem in Africa, for instance. What is common across all these environments from your perspective? And then maybe when you finish, we'll give Mulumba here just an indication, maybe to hear from his standpoint, how he sees from an investor perspective as well, you know, and then maybe you can expand that out. So,
very good question, and a question that has shaped the way I think probably in the last 2 years. For example, when I'm talking to investors and they talk to me about your market size, about competition and all that, I feel there's a disconnect when entrepreneurs start until they get to a certain point, where they need to realize that the problem that you're trying to solve, because mostly entrepreneurship is about that. The problem that you're trying to solve is not a Zambian problem. It's an African problem. Moving to all these African countries, I can tell you for a fact that the problems that we have are the same problems that the neighboring country has. And it gave me a bit of peace to know that I am not limited by the market that I am in, and that I have a market of the whole of Africa. And that put me in a place where now I stopped building a Zambian product. And I started building an African product. So if you come to my office, I've got a big map of Africa. I've got arrows inside. Because now when I'm talking to people, I'm telling them we started here. Okay, this is where we started. This is what is able to feed us today. But whatever is going to feed my investors and everybody else is how do we take this solution and move it here and here and here all the way up. And which I think, because I see how entrepreneurs panic. Oh, is this market enough for me? Dude, the market is the whole of Africa. Very untapped market. So, and also now even when you're building products, it helps when you build products that are scalable across Africa.
Yeah.
So the one common thing I can say is that the problems that we're facing, Africa is very similar. The food we eat is the same. We might have different languages, but we are very, very similar, more than you can imagine.
Yeah.
So the problems that we have are the same. Entrepreneurs, especially the entrepreneurs that I talk to as friends, we're building solutions for African problems, not for Zambia or for Malawi.
Yeah.
I think that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Maybe let me just come in because I like the fact that you mentioned. I think investors looking for that market size. I think it's the biggest one that that a lot of entrepreneurs find it hard to fix because again they limited to Zambia being a very, very small market of compared to Nigeria, compared to Kenya. So I find that these solutions are much better to fix in those populated areas, especially when they are talking about the mass market, right?
Yeah.
I think piggybacking from your experience in seeing how both ecosystems have worked from the US, talking about Silicon Valley, South Africa, we're talking about maybe, I don't know where it is right now, in terms of like the scale of the growth of entrepreneurship. I'm curious on the investor point of view, how long it would take for us to get to that level. What do we need? I'm worried because I might be a sower, but I don't think I'm gonna. I'm gonna, yeah, you know, that kind of thing. Because I'm always like, okay, if I think about 10 years from now, like, could I go back and then see it? Wow, like Thanos type of thing. Like, we did it, you know, that kind of thing. Where you just have peace, right? But yeah, how long do you think it's gonna take? Are we gonna be part of it to see it?
It's a very interesting question, right? Because I think from an investor's perspective, most times when you're going into an investment, you're looking at sort of long term, right?
Yeah.
That would be the ideal part of it.
Yeah.
And even when I sort of put on my investing on behalf of the state, we're always sort of looking long term and what is it that we can sort of bring to bear in terms of providing that environment where entrepreneurs can then come in, that ecosystem, how are we building that ecosystem around it? I don't think it should be an issue of when are we going to reach, say, Silicon Valley status or style of investment. We can't ever replicate Silicon Valley, right, in Zambia or any other sort of ecosystem around the continent. However, we can build ecosystems around the continent that speak to the challenges that entrepreneurs are facing on the ground and need to be resolved. And I think therein then also lies quite a lot of opportunity. I think we were talking earlier about sort of when you look at the energy situation, right? Like Afshon has said, that is the same across different countries around the region, different markets around the region. If you can solve within a country a challenge that a population or users face, you can solve that same challenge elsewhere. And I don't think it's an issue of when do we get there. We are solving some of these issues today, right? It's now a matter of how do we grow this ecosystem. We're sitting in a place, Bongo Hive, that has played a major role in building that ecosystem within the Zambian sort of market, right? And it's beautiful to see, but we certainly need, I think, more African entrepreneurs building businesses and solutions to some of our own challenges. And the more we have that, and the more local capital we start to mobilize, right, the better. I think we're talking about mentorship. There are African entrepreneurs, I think, who require mentorship from African mentors who've gone through these difficulties within several markets to get to where they are. They will require that, and we need to then also build that other side of the ecosystem. And I think through successful entrepreneurs like Afshon, sort of picking up within the market, you start to build all those steps. And it's, we may not see it, but it's the tree that we plant today that will provide the shade for tomorrow's generations. And that's where we sort of need to be thinking. And that's the legacy, even I think in everything that I've sort of done, whether it be on a personal level or work-wise, it's that legacy of thinking, hey, whether or not I put in my hours or my years in Liberia, I know for sure at some point Liberia 20 years from today is going to be that much better because we were there to help it get to where it is today. I don't have to benefit from it directly, but I know for sure today that people are reaping those dividends today in Liberia, right? So that's sort of my approach to even investing. I think it doesn't have to be locally, but I know that a number of these things are happening around us. That once we build this thing together, even logistics, we're talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area, and how are we building that Continental Free Trade Area to work well for the African market? Nobody else is going to have to do it but us to build it. So
Mulumba, your exposure, how has your exposure, and I ask this in the context of, we talked about Afshon's exposure, and he sort of answered how that has helped him with what he's doing now. Your exposure, how is that helping you with what you bring back?
I think it drives everything that I sort of get involved in, right? From mentorship to entrepreneurship at my own level. I think one of the best quotes I think I heard was from Monica Musonda, where she says, don't be a willing participant in your, an idle participant in your economy, right? You have to be an active participant and don't sit on the fence and think that, oh, that issue is going to get resolved. So I think that exposure of having to see a Liberia sort of being rebuilt from decades-long civil wars to then it becoming a fledgling democracy. Yes, they still have a lot to do and grow, but for me, that is one thing that drives me to say, I need to ensure that a lot of the African, my compatriots in Zambia, have that opportunity to have a better life for themselves going forward. Because I've seen the worst of what can happen when you don't take care of those things.
I'm just curious what needs to, because again, when talking about it from a growth level, there's a gradual growth where it just grows by its own, without being interrupted, without being, and speaking about reference to Liberia, it really came out from a struggle to where it is now. I think there's that pain or drive that gives a country that we've lost something, now we're gaining something and we're rebuilding, right? I don't know how the circumstances can be compared to what we have now. Sort of like, if we don't have that, then what needs to happen for us to switch on? Because with a gradual growth, it take about 10 years. But if we switch on, maybe take about 5 years. Is it a mindset thing? Is it a collaboration thing? Is it a, I don't know, is it a resources thing? Is it a, like how we do have resources, we have even.
It depends on how you're looking at this, right? Because I think embedded in your question is you need something cataclysmic to happen to spur that growth in an economy. Not necessarily so, because that cataclysmic happening may be a negative thing, right? And it will take you a lot longer to get to, say, a level that a country was at 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if not, right? So, again, I think it's about what it is that the country sort of sets forward as its objective over a long period of time. I think that short-term thinking that a lot of African economies and countries have sort of done over the decades needs to change. You will see a lot of areas where you've seen development happen consistently over a period of time. It's because there was a concerted effort by the country's leadership then to say, we need to resolve this. We shouldn't have a repeat of hunger in a country. And hunger as well is a major driver. Of course, right? Food security across the continent is a major driver.
Foundational,
Yes, it's foundational. If people are hungry, they can't do a lot of other things. So how do we then resolve those kinds of challenges, I think, as a continent? And we can only do it together, and that's the only path, I think. And not to say that you need a negative event to then spur you to development.
As you put it,
I'm not deciding anything though.
Can I maybe jump on just before you ask the question?
Go for it.
I'm trying to link it to his part. So, in one of his earlier points, remember he spoke of the fact that, look, a problem is not Zambian, it's Africa. What just changes is the flavor, but the problem is the same at heart, right? So maybe here you use chili, here you use salt, but it's the same problem, right? So
it hits differently though. Yeah. Chili and so.
So riding on that, and this is an expansion on George's thing. What would be the fundamental approach? So let's say that one was building a blueprint for call it the African Renaissance, to jumpstart this whole thing, but from a Central African perspective. So if we initially admit our problems are the same, there are power shortages here, there are power shortages in Nigeria, there are power shortages in South Africa, there are power shortages in Ghana, in Zim, it happens. So there are power shortages. There are food shortages as well. There's drought, you understand, you have all these things, right? So if you were to define, and these are questions open to both of you, maybe starting with Wallace first. If you were to define a common blueprint that entrepreneurs across Africa can adopt, of areas where they can start collaboratively solving together, what would that blueprint look like from your perspective of an entrepreneur? And then when he answers, you'd give us what that blueprint looks like from an investor's point of view. So maybe.
Okay, what I'll do is I'll use a real case scenario for my business, and then it will explain to you what I look at and how I change how I build my business.
Right.
So the first thing that I understood was that only about 2 to 3% of e-commerce is happening in Africa.
How, what?
Only about 2%.
2%?
Yes.
In Africa?
In Africa, yeah. So what that, compared to other developed nations, so what that means is that there is another, so, and then you look at e-commerce to succeed, what do you need? So you look at the biggest, let's look at the biggest e-commerce company, which is Amazon. What does Amazon have? Okay, so Amazon has got very solid e-commerce platforms. Amazon has got very good logistics. Amazon has got very good fulfillment centers, which is storage. And then you map now that, and actually the funny thing is that all these solutions that we have actually exist. They're just not linked together.
Of course.
Right.
Okay. So for example, what I did when I was building, so during COVID, when we started, during COVID, our business really grew. Okay. It was a catalyst. But then it was also a very eye-opening moment for me because I noticed 2 people started buying bikes, 3 people started buying this, and I was like, this is the easiest market to get into, food delivery. And I was like, this market will not exist in the next 4 or 5 years. So what do I do? That's when we rebranded. We started now pivoting a bit. That's when we got into partnership with Lafarge. We started doing cement. So now people started knowing us as a last mile delivery company. So when people started knowing us as a last mile delivery company, that means we could deliver other things other than food. So we started getting a lot of B2B deals. And so for example, like one of our businesses, in the morning, at 4 in the morning, we pick fish from LLO warehouses. We distribute to retailers, supermarkets, and so on and so forth, using our two-wheelers.
Business to business.
Exactly. So we're like, okay. But then also what we started noticing is, other than people that were eating from restaurants, also wanted other things delivered to them from supermarkets. But then the problem with, for example, like a restaurant business kind of business is, food from restaurants is a premium product. Targets middle class, high end.
Of course,
clientele. But then if you're buying bread, if you're doing your shopping, you would still want it delivered, but at a certain price point. Okay. That's when we said. That's when we built now another product called Afri Supermarket, which strictly just in partnership with Jumbo, which strictly now focuses just on fast-moving consumer goods. And how we built it was we built it as a whole separate product because we didn't want people to have the idea that the price point was the same as Afri delivery. So we have people that use Afri Supermarket that have never and will never use Afri delivery. They've got separate apps, they've got separate platforms and all that stuff. And then as we were doing all this, we started noticing something. Okay, so we're building very good logistics system, we're building very good e-commerce systems. But then for us to become a full circle kind of business, we had to start changing the mindset of the person that is producing products and then distributing products.
Yeah.
Because, for example, what happens is if you're a farmer or let's assume you manufacture honey. Your idea is you want to get this product, take it to ShopRite. Okay. But then the problem with that is you will do that, all of you guys, but then maybe 2-3 you get picked. You always complain about margins, how they get pushed around and so on. But then we looked at our business, we were like, okay, but we built this great online business. Why don't we start educating these guys on how to go direct to consumer? Okay, because if you go direct to consumer, first of all, your money is immediate. You can brand your product however you want. You can market your product however you want. You don't have to worry about having to give too many rebates if you don't want to, and so on. So we started seeing it as, and we got into partnership with the government, and we started looking at how we can digitize SMEs so that when they're building their products, this is a long story, I'll show it in like 5 minutes. When you have your product, first of all, you need to start thinking of how I can get to the consumer instead of going through middlemen. How I can get my money immediately, and how I can distribute this product. But another issue that existed or exists is that if you're a farmer or manufacturer of something here locally, nobody ever looks at how can I sell my product in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, and so on. And if you look at how Amazon works, you can order a product from one state to be delivered in another state. You will never know. You will just get it in 3 to 5 days. Okay.
Just seeing the tracker.
And we're like, you know what? So we started talking to these farmers and all these guys. They're like, okay, if you want me to sell your products, what exactly do you need and what do I need? And we started noticing that most of these guys, one of the reasons why they were not producing enough is they lacked other things like fulfillment centers. So I'm going to have all this inventory. Am I going to take it? For you to come and pick it in my storage spaces is too far. Logistically, it doesn't make sense. And we came up with an idea. You know what? Let's start thinking about fulfillment centers. The minute we
which are warehouses, right?
The minute we started thinking about that, we were like, you know what? This is actually what Amazon has done. They created a fulfillment center where you send your goods. They place it on their sites. They've got all these contractors, drivers, and so on. And then we, anytime an order comes, it's picked from there and shipped. You can still ship it from your own fulfillment center. But when it comes to delivery time, it's quicker if it's coming from an Amazon fulfillment center. They charge for those fulfillment centers, which means they're generating revenue out of that. And then we started looking at every country has a storage facility, but you don't have a network of storage facilities where if you want to distribute something in Malawi, you can come and say, I want to book space. I want to select country, see the storage space is available, book space there, and then send my goods there, and whichever e-commerce site exists there, will be able to distribute goods for me from that. So that's when we looked at, most people know us for Afri Delivery, but the group company is called Afri Online. We've got 3 products, Afri Delivery, Afri Supermarket, and Afri Storage. So what we've done with Afri Delivery, we created a product that is now bringing all these logistics partners together. What we've done with Afri Storage is you can go there and list your storage facility, cold storage and dry storage goods. And then now what we've done with the e-commerce platforms, we're trying to see how we can launch them in these countries so they can all go together. So that by the time I'm approaching a farmer here in Zambia and tell them, I like your honey or your conflicts, I can tell you how I can sell these conflicts not only in Zambia, but I can also send them to Zimbabwe, to Congo, to Malawi, to Angola, and all these countries. And if you think about that as how we personally mapped a problem that exists and then created a solution for that, it's easier now for me to explain what my business is. We started like this, it evolved to this and this and this and this. Because one of the biggest challenges I always had was to convince an investor that I can build an African business. Because they used to look at Afri Delivery, they'd be like, yeah, but food delivery. But then I was like, okay, food delivery is just where we started. Where do we take this? So just by that short story, you can see how we first of all saw the problem. Only 2% of e-commerce is happening here. And then we started seeing how we could use what already existed to build a solution. And as we speak now, for example, like one of the startups called Bosso, when they started building their business, there were two things they tried to do themselves, and they had challenges. They tried to do logistics, it became a challenge. They tried to do fulfillment, it became a challenge. So what they did, they came to us. We gave them logistics API, so they integrate in that with that, and we do logistics for them. And then now they're moving goods now from our storage facilities. So now imagine another 10, 15 other startups coming.
Doing that.
They'll plug into the same ecosystem.
Of course, that's already done. You know what you've done, sorry Mulumba, what you've done is you have answered the question behind the question. And you've provided framework. And I think sometimes when you watch some of these things, you get lost in focusing on what the question was. But I think you've answered, you've given how someone should think about the problem to come up with their unique solution. And the reason why I wanted to say that is so people don't get lost in what you're explaining and they think that you are bragging about what you've done.
No.
But you're mind mapping, you know what I mean? You're mind mapping, and I think people should pay attention to exactly that, you know, because you can get that, do it for delivery. You can get that, do it for mining. You can get that, it's the same concept.
For every single
you know,
thing.
Now, Mulumba, go for it.
Oh, no, I was saying that was a brilliant and excellent, I think, way of thinking about and framing the problem, right? And from that, you've clearly expanded what sort of services you're able to provide. You're now as you mentioned, an ecosystem enabler. Because Bosso, who actually, I think, went on their site a couple of days ago to look for roofing sheets. Those are those are the kinds of solutions I think we need to find in the market. Because I will tell you this, finding information online or even e-commerce, it speaks to that 2% because we're not really getting producers to a market. And I think once we start creating these marketplaces and enabling the services to power these marketplaces, then we'll start seeing a thriving e-commerce system, I think, on the continent. So that's a brilliant way of doing it.
From maybe an investor standpoint, because he has given us his viewpoint from his source of reality, so to speak. And from an investor standpoint, you'd already also touched on this in some of your earlier preambles. So maybe you give us something like a unique perspective that what do investors look at towards this whole formation of a blueprint. And he gave us, like you said, a very practical example of how that is done. And he used his business. Like I said, this is like a very good masterclass. I mean, your answers are just spot on. And therefore, from your point of view, you having thrown the checkbooks around a bit, I hope you throw it in our direction. What do you think? What from your viewpoints are these blueprints? What's your own view towards this? What would you contribute in addition to what he said?
Sure. So maybe I'll look at it from his industry and sector in terms of logistics, right? And I think maybe take a more macro view, like we mentioned earlier. When you look at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area sort of being enabled, what AfriDelivery and their systems are doing is essentially enabling that continental free trade area to work. Now, they will need the rails, no pun intended, but the rails, which is now the bulk and heavy infrastructure. And that's where I think when you start talking blueprints as whether it's a Southern Africa region, it's Central and Southern Africa, COMESA, we need to get these markets integrated, because if we can source goods, services from one corner of the continent and we can deliver to that other corner of the continent, whether it's payment systems, it's agricultural produce that's going from maybe a more productive area to the next. We won't be able to do that without the hard infrastructure. And I think when we start talking blueprints, that's the sort of, those are some of the conversations we actually need to start having, I think, at the macro level. And it also then goes again to what we were discussing earlier in terms of energy. Right? If the entire Southern Africa or African continent is facing these energy challenges, how is it that we can then plug in to enable businesses that will require that energy to be able to work? And I think to sort of answer your question in a roundabout way, I think from the investment perspective, whether it's at national level or even regionally, in terms of regional bodies, I think who are trying to enable cross-border trade and financing and that sort of thing, to your institutional investors who I think need to start empowering and enabling businesses such as these, because they are solving a problem and a critical problem of African infrastructure. So I think what we, I think as a blueprint, need to look at, all of this has to be integrated in one way or the other. And it takes that concerted effort across the different sort of levels of ecosystems for them to work.
Fantastic. A quick one as well is, and this is just for the general audience, of which I happen to be like 2 hands and 2 legs in the air. So IDC in itself is basically a holding for a group of companies, and you have this structured investment. So does the IDC look at companies very much like Afri-Delivery on its books, or it looks at the slightly broader companies? And then what would be the criteria? Maybe that's the question to ask.
Okay, so speaking about IDC, and this is obviously now the state level of investment, right? The IDC, given its investment policy and guidelines, tends to look at businesses obviously that will require a $5 million or more capital injection from the IDC, right? This is so that we don't crowd out, I think, sort of smaller players and other institutions and agencies that have been created essentially to provide that initial seed capital. We were talking earlier in terms of the ecosystem. The ecosystem as well does have different levels of investors, right? On a personal level, I'm an angel investor, right? But sort of nationally, I make investments on behalf of the state. And with those investments, yes, there's certain criteria that we look at, but we are also looking to integrate SMEs and other scale-ups within sort of the group ecosystem, right? And that speaks to maybe some of their partners could be maybe the telcos service that we have within the group. It could be the banks and financial institutions. It could be all of these other different businesses, I think, that they can plug into, or you know, vice versa. And for us, that is a way that we're sort of contributing and driving that impact.
I'm just curious how the relationship is with, I think we're talking about it from the government level to your, also seeing that there's in this position, you're talking about like the government, and then you're talking about it from a startup level. I know that there's mostly maybe, there's a priority in terms of like what you mentioned on looking at things to do with policies on that level, but just how does it scale down to the startup to also understand what's going on and what the government is thinking, where the head is at? I know it's like we read about it mostly in policies and all that. I think it's communicated, but how then can he then contribute to the bigger goal that the government is?
Right.
Yeah, I think that there's also a miscommunication there in terms of like the information is not disseminated properly, but how is the information? How can they contribute?
Right. So I'll draw upon something that we did, I think, in our MBA course, doing business in Africa. And I think one of the lecturers, I think, who came to speak to us, I think, just mentioned to say, you know, as entrepreneurs across the continent, you have to be in tune with, say, what government is thinking in terms of different sectors, right? And some of the ways you do that, there are policies, there's documents, I think, that have been generated publicly. Some of those, obviously, I think a lot more of the bigger businesses will likely target them. But if you look, for instance, within the IDC group with Zanaco, right? Zanaco is providing access to financing to SMEs and other startups, right? They're providing that support across different sort of sectors, right? And they participate within the ecosystem in that sense. So there are different ways I think all of these businesses are sort of plugging in and trying to help the SME sector as well as the startup space. And that's the way I think we sort of play that role within the ecosystem. It's not every project or every company that will have a touch point with an SME, but even when you look at how we go about developing a number of our projects, right, and assets, we're looking at plugging in for instance, outgrowers to provide produce to a particular sort of core venture farm, right? And beyond that, it's what other businesses can then plug into that.
Yeah.
When you set up a processing facility, you're getting farmers within that particular area and beyond to provide produce and stock into that processing facility, and then that then creates that other growth, I think, within that particular area. So there's different ways within which startups, SMEs can then latch on to what government is doing, and that's part of one of the ways that you can do that.
I think I'd like to make a contribution there. Because because if we discuss about what the government is doing, let's discuss about what they're not doing. It's not, and I understand. The reason I understand is because probably this is when startups, our kind of startups, are becoming a thing. This is startups are becoming fashionable now. So they were not really something someone could look at and be like, this is going to be something. There's something that happened in 2018. There's an UN organization, UN-funded organization called ITC. I don't know if you know it. International Trade Center.
Yes. ITC.
So what ITC did is they came to Zambia. They go to countries and they just pick random startups. And there's a way they do it, and they just work with you. So what they do is they pick you, they expose you to things. So they'll take you to this event, they'll take you to this event, they'll take you to this event. They don't give you money. So they say, okay, we'll expose you to a certain network. So they took us to the Web Summit in what was it? Portugal. They took us to the Barcelona thing this year. They pay for us to just show ourselves somewhere. Okay? And if those guys came like in a year or two and took a bit of credit for our growth, I would 100% let them have it. I believe the one thing that the government is not doing is they are not able to look at us, okay, and have conversations with us, and tell us their plans and ask us how we can contribute. Because I really, really honestly believe in the power of the government. I believe they can move a lot of things. I've personally had very bad experiences, unfortunately, because my business grew to a certain point and everybody knew it. Okay. So the only time I used to have government guys in my office was regulations and fines and all that stuff. I'm like, okay, but none of you guys are here to understand my journey. You don't know whether I have debt. You don't know how I got to this journey. Instead of you asking how you can make it easier for me, you're coming to compare me, telling me, but this company is doing this. You're comparing me to a company like FMB that is funded in millions of dollars just because you assume. I remember one time I was told that the assumption was that we were very cash rich because we won awards. We won more than 10 awards. Okay. And I felt like that was a very
it came out on the news, huh? Came out on the news, huh?
The what?
It came out on the news.
I don't know. I don't remember. Okay. But the idea was, the assumption was that just because we've made all these strides, we had made it. Okay. If I tell my story now, people will understand that actually, and we bootstrapped all this through. It's not like someone came and gave us like a ton of funding. But they did not record this journey of how we build this for us to get to where we are. And if you look at even whatever you've made and whatever you spend just to make sure you continue existing, it becomes very, very, very hard. Extremely hard. And when you succeed, they'll take the credit. They'll be like, this is our company. Yes, it is your company, but I believe you will not take credit for a child. If a child
who's now educated
graduates, and you're not the one that educated them,
you can't take credit for it.
Exactly. And I think it's a very, very big problem. And my biggest fear, so we're past that. Okay? But my biggest fear is for the guys coming behind me.
Of course.
Because I know that there are things they don't know, and there are things that will come and hit them when they get to that point.
They
get a bit of publicity. These assumptions made. These guys have got this big office. Wow, they must be making a lot of money. They can even afford to pay this. It's let me tell you, those are the most ignorant arguments I've seen. And it's a point. It's very concerning.
Yeah.
Because I look at startups and very good startups, but I know for a fact that when they get to a certain point, whatever they'll get hit with will be tough. And the problem is we don't discuss. It's like a relationship. You should come and ask me, what are you going through? How can I help you fix it? And I'll ask you, what are you going through? How can I help you? Because startups are some of the most innovative spaces you can ever find. The best ideas come from there. Let me tell you, the amount of work we put in. I go into the office at 7 a.m. I leave at close to midnight. The guys are still in the office saying we're trying to build billion-dollar businesses. And they're not lying. These guys actually believe they're building unicorns. Okay, when we sit, because now both and us share office, so they sit on the other side. If you listen to the conversations we're having, we're building billion-dollar businesses. So we're talking, okay, I want to scale to this country. Then I tell them, okay, I'll provide you storage facility, I'll provide you logistics, you bring your e-commerce. And let me tell you the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the investors that are coming to invest in us are not Zambian investors.
There you go.
Of course,
So where does this ownership end up?
Outside the country.
Outside. Okay. It's not that we were not there. We were there. But you never took us as yours when we were trying to get there. Because now, even the exposure that we have at the moment,
it's
international
like
exposure. So that's the guys are like, okay, first, when are you going to, will you be able to move your head office to this country? The minute you start having those conversations, you are out.
Maybe something to add, because he also made a point, if you remember. One of his calls to action was basically African capital.
Right.
So he had actually said it per se. I guess where the tying into the conversation is, and that's where the question is, of course, I'm not sure anyone on this table can answer that question 100%, is, to your point, how does the government step in to enable the environment enough to reduce the friction that a whole lot of these startups are facing? And I can actually accede to this point, and I'll give an example of my previous place, because I remember that we were told, and this was a very funny thing. So they go for the central bank. I don't know whether it was Commercial or SADC. They have one of those for their central banks, and then they are giving examples. And then I think it was the South African side that was talking about the company I was formerly involved then. Now the Zambians who were part of the delegation did not know. So imagine that the guy from the Zambian, from South African Central Bank are talking about a company in Zambia. And then the Zambian guys are not aware. And so what happens is that this happened maybe the previous year. Then like in January apparently, and that was the time I normally would travel out for my annual leave and all, they show up and start asking for, where's your certificate? Where's your this? Where's that? Are you compliant? Let's see your books. Let's see your this. And they go to all the bank clients we had, and we're asking for the contracts that we had. It was literally like, we're just waiting to catch you. We just want to see what you've done wrong. And wham, the book slams. But remember that where they were not discussing crimes. They were discussing innovations in the region, and they cited an example of a country that had not a company, a country.
Right.
So maybe the origin, and I get where a lot of the angst comes from, is how do we facilitate these discussions between the private sector and government for this policy that we are not antagonistic to each other. We are actually two sides of the same coin, just opposite sides. How do we see the common view?
Because you even start getting scared of growth. They're like, oh, I'll be nominated again. So, no, this is cause for alarm. And you start hiding. The more you hide, then you can't innovate. You're not proud of what you're building. And let me tell you for a fact, as a startup or entrepreneur, there's absolutely no way you can build a perfect business.
Correct.
It's impossible.
Correct.
It is absolutely impossible. The first 5 to 10 years of your business are full of mistakes.
Yep.
Full of mistakes, and that's why when you go cleaning up as you go. You go cleaning up as you go. You go cleaning up as you go. But it is impossible for you to come and say, okay, 5, 10 years ago you did this, and then you start. Doesn't work like that. But
but I think it speaks to a broader need for the development of the ecosystem, right? And the development of whether it be the entrepreneurs themselves or the investors themselves. And that development, I think, requires not only skill set, but experience, as well as, I think, a number of other things that can sort of bring all of this together.
Yeah, stakeholders.
Right? And yes, stakeholders. And it's not just, I think, from the government's side of things, right? Government has a lot of things that it has to deal with already, right? But we were talking about Silicon Valley earlier, and that ecosystem, although government provided a lot of the support and some of the research that went into the development of some of these companies in Silicon Valley, they weren't necessarily always there, but it was that mushrooming of the ecosystem in Silicon Valley that actually then created the mentorship programs such as what is this one with the
Y Combinator?
Y Combinator, right? The kind of Y Combinator type of accelerators and incubators. My first job was in a tech company that was incubated in my university's incubation hub.
imagine that.
Right? So you can see the kind of support. And this was a state school, right? This is University of Maryland, Baltimore County. But that is how essentially then government funded and helped that Baltimore ecosystem to develop in terms of tech. So again, there's different things I think that governments around the world are probably then likely doing. But again, talking about how do we bring that local capital, and it's from human capital to financial capital.
Exactly.
And that's where I think we need to sort of start to
Bridge that gap,
bridge that gap, right?
Man, on that point, and we'll pick up from it. There's a conversation that needs to be had, and what we're really speaking about is how does the entrepreneur need to see the way that central government or governments channel funds or put up institutions that are then supposed to interact with them? And we'll talk about that a little bit. I think there's a need for context, and if Mulumba can talk about maybe even just one customer journey or one investment journey of how we'll start at maybe a government institution all the way down to the SMEs. And I'll jump in as well.
Okay, so so that journey for me, because of the stakeholders that we usually deal with, is not necessarily a journey that we walk to the SME, because that's really not our sort of niche, right? But I think a customer journey where you've got potential entrepreneurs within the market that are looking to deploy projects in what government has deemed priority sectors. Again, it requires an entrepreneur then to be aware of what government is sort of putting out. Every government puts out national development plans.
Right, the NDP that becomes a real thing.
Correct. So then again, it goes to the entrepreneurial capital as well that we're building, right? Do we have entrepreneurs then that are, like, you guys looked at what is wrong with fulfillment centers and e-commerce within the continent, and you found that solution, right? How are we then getting to those solutions with the help of government? In some instances, yes, government will create environments where private sector can come on board, and I think there's PPDF, which is one of government's sort of forums for interaction between the public sector as well as private sector. So governments, I think, are realizing, that there's a need to integrate all of these sort of facets of investment in a country. And they're creating platforms, I think, and avenues for entrepreneurs to connect. You will see, I think, recently there was Impact Capital Africa, for instance. You know, that event that was hosted locally, right? That brought together investors, local and international, plus local entrepreneurs. Those are the systems and, I think, platforms that we then need to create, I think, a lot more of, to be able to galvanize that sort of investment.
All right. And on that point,
my non-expert view.
No, and you've mapped it. We'll just speak about it when we come back, but you've mapped it. And I'll just give a bit of context on how those layers come all the way down and reach down to Afshon. There's a definite journey. Is it perfect? No. Is it reaching everyone? Is it working? No. But there is efforts that are being made to do it. And as someone who invests at that level, at national level, there is a way that you can't necessarily directly be involved with Afshon per se. But there's a way that a perspective of trying to have that effect through 1 or 2, 3, 4 agencies. And maybe those 1 or 2, 3, 4 agencies Afshon then doesn't know about. Then that's where there's a break in information.
Correct.
And that's what we need to make clear. And that's where PPDF, ICA, that's where those conversations are important. Yeah.
My mind is in so many places right now. I think it's just sitting in from a perspective of what the government is doing, what the startups are doing. I think I don't know where I am in the midst of all of this, right? And it's a good point that you also mentioned around, I think that my drive has always been like, are you participating or are you contributing? I think just the way that you also mentioned it on Monica Saunders' status, I was saying that, okay, fine, are you observing or are you being part of the act? And we've had quite great conversations. And now it's shifting around, okay, what does the future look like?
Yeah.
I think it would be nice as well to kind of like see that from your perspective and from your perspective. I know it's going to be combined with a lot of, how can I put it, your personal, but it would be also interesting as well if you put in your, what does that look like, especially for Zambia, that people can also carry along your vision if they don't have a vision. I don't know if Bach has a vision, but he needs to sort of like align to all of this. Yeah, but yeah, I think we can start from who's gonna go first. Cool. We're gonna start from you.
To the vision.
Yeah.
I think first of all the vision for us is very crystal clear.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying that is because all the pieces are coming together, and you finally have a package that is not a selfish package. What I mean by this is that it's not a package that's only good for us as a business. It's also a package that's good for the ecosystem. Where now there's startups coming out. It's a package that's good for the country, and it's good for Africa in general. And we're finally achieving the status of what I always wanted to become as a company, which is an enabler. And we've started now building a business that first of all is comparable to an international business, but also a business that cuts across the rest of Africa and is able to actually solve some of these problems. So I see a very busy future, but also a very bright future, and I also see a future that I can tag along a lot of people. So it's no longer about what am I going to do in the next 3 to 6 months. It's about the next 10 years now. I'll be able to achieve what we want to achieve in the next 10 years. And I'm very, very hopeful. I'll continue pushing and lobbying for and mentoring the startups that are coming up. Because I believe that it's very important that they don't go through some of the challenges that we went through. And even just by sharing knowledge, that's enough. But I think we're in a very good place, and I would encourage the government to talk to us. Know how we're doing, ask how we're doing, how can we help. We want to change how we converse, how we talk to each other. And there's a lot of innovation coming from this environment that we're in. And if we share that with you, it will change a lot of things. And also now it's good for, imagine having a unicorn born out of Zambia. You ever thought about that? The same way we talk about Flutterwave. Talk about a company like that's made here.
Coming out of Zambia.
Has a lot of pride that comes with that. So I think we're headed there.
Nice.
Okay, I think for me, I'm an eternal African optimist, right? So I always believe in the brighter future that the continent has. And I think from the Zambian perspective, I think our future is quite bright. We are sitting, I think, at a place in our history that sees a lot of convergence of different things coming together, whether it's technologies, whether it be the energy transition, of which obviously a lot of the mineral resource wealth that comes from Zambia is going to be powering a lot of that transition. So there's a lot of upside in that sense. It's the energy space and the opportunities that lie within that energy space as well that we as a country, I think, can take advantage of and become an energy powerhouse on the continent and be able to provide for the rest of it. It's in logistics, for instance, right? We sit at the heart of the continent, right? There's no Nakala Corridor, Beira, Dar es Salaam on the other side, Lobito, that is connecting all of the Southern Africa and East Africa and even potentially West Africa without going through Zambia, right? How can we, I think, galvanize that position that we have to be able to empower and enable businesses across Zambia and across the continent to be able to take advantage of that. On a personal level, I think for me, the next 10 years, I think as Afshon has mentioned, will be about mentorship, right? And mentoring the next wave of entrepreneurs, potential investors that are coming into the country, and as well building these businesses and funds that will help to build the ecosystem going forward. And I think that is my drive over the next decade or so.
All right, George, your takeaway?
I'm the one. This is my session. No. How do I pass it on that? No, I'm in charge. Bob?
Your take.
Your take.
Man, this is why George has no friends. Look, for me, having Mulumba and Afshon here, presents a positive and a negative, not in the sense of what those things stand for, but just a completion of a circuit. You know what I mean? Which is, in their professional endeavors, they, three words maybe that stand out. Purpose, you know what I mean? There's purpose there's a why you're both doing it. You, in your own schematic, Mulumba, you are trying to also bridge a gap of how we can get to better outcomes for our people. And if that means better speaking to Afshon, then we're looking to bridge those gaps. For Afshon, it's scaling at a level where we are at governmental size, national size, requires communicating with the government. The why is the same. So there's this movement towards each other. We need, as a country, for Afshon and startups like his to grow and band together and have a voice. That comes with doing some of the things that you are doing, creating an ecosystem where everyone feeds in, because now that's one voice. This voice will be loud enough for then central government or whoever the administrators are to listen. On the central government side or agencies working for the government, the nice thing there and the conversation that's starting is we see what's happening regionally, and that's a wake-up call to say, oh, okay, I think we may need to start listening to what's going on there. And we need to develop an ear of active listening. And we don't know if that skill set is there yet, but we've seen things on the market where this is beginning to happen. That's very exciting. I'm optimistic about that, and that's why this conversation is important. Chinadu.
I think you've probably hit the nail on the head. You've covered most of the primary key points. One takeaway from this conversation was to have two, for lack of a better term, polarizing viewpoints on the table, but also the fact that they both bring a wealth of knowledge. So when you listen to Afcon talk, he has what I would term as contained passion. So it's like a nuclear bomb that he has under control. No, if this explodes, it's going to kill all of us. So let's just manage it the way it is. And then you have his wealth of experience, having also just worked here and outside. So you have the context of two environments.
Exactly.
So when there's this discussion, the fact that I've picked up the viewpoint of what the typical entrepreneur faces, what his challenges are, and his motivations in spite of those challenges.
Right.
Because you've never put the complaint first.
Yeah.
You've always said we've achieved this. However, there are certain things that detract from it being bigger than it is.
Yeah.
And then you've also paved the way by going ahead to prepare the next generation of entrepreneurs to avoid the mistakes you've made and to give them the easy stops through the journey. So already you are paying it forward.
Yeah.
And not too many people are aware of the blessing that holds.
Yeah, true.
Because like you said, a lot of us want the bragging rights, but we are not also, I don't know why you want to be the one who tells a story that says, I made it. Okay, how many other people have you trained? It doesn't matter because they were not up to it. I made it. You are training the next generation who will probably take that journey of 10 years, 20 to 50.
Yeah.
Beyond us or beyond our lifetime.
Yeah.
And then in your case, you wear a very fascinating hat, a hat where you are both in the public sector and in the private sector at the same time.
Yeah.
And you're an investor in both. So you happen to have this unique privilege of wearing two caps where you can see the challenge or the hindrances of government, even though you're still working to change it from within. But at the same time, you've also carved a niche for yourself as an angel investor, and then your engagements. When one listens to you, they have your wealth of experience, they have your exposure, and they have the fact that you are able to teleguide them in the most precise way, especially with what we call government speak, that language that government always has of talking, without quite saying anything yet. And these are unique perspectives that our audience would benefit from learning, because it is still the same challenge for some of those who are pursuing their entrepreneurial journey that they will encounter nonetheless. So, fascinating discussion. If we could have gone beyond the 1 hour 30 minute mark, I would have done it willingly. And I think at this juncture, I throw it back to George.
Cool. I'll wrap up. Well, that pause was for you guys to give me.
Yes, please.
Okay, but I think we talked a lot about the ecosystem. I'll just wrap this up. But why I was referring to Silicon Valley is because I think they already gave us like a blueprint on what to follow, right? And I think that's sort of like maybe some of the things that we've also seen also working through the market. But it first starts from educational university. That's where those opportunities were coming in. Then how do you grow that guy who's from a university to not think about, okay, fine, what's my next job, right? How can I then start a business with the skill that I have? What resources or what communities does it need to function while he's in that state? So that's where maybe incubators come in. You have your maybe government also comes in to facilitate more like your family and friends come in, kind of thing. Then you move to another stage where it's now investment. Like then you look at exactly fine, who's that ecosystem builder that's also coming in to also do that. Now you look at your international investors, you look at your whatever investors. But for that cycle to complete is something that would say that currently I think we're in that investment stage. But what the vision that you have is how can you then start giving back to the ecosystem, right? With mentorship, but also looking at it from an investment point of view, because when you talk about like for example, this Angry Bird, for example, the founder, it really started from here, going all the way to the government, going all the way towards this investment, and it's now a unicorn. But the conversation that is having here, because we also need a representative that can speak to the government on that level and say, hey, I've got my incubators here, I've got your startups here, this is what they need. So that representation of someone who understands it from a university level all the way to here to build it from a growth level, we can now have those conversations with the government and also not just having conversations, but also contribute to the policy as well. Talking about the policies and stuff like that, or the Startup Act policies. So all of those are kind of like, how then do we then champion that one business that's grown enough to understand how the ecosystem works to also contribute to the policies. So that cycle is what my future, how can I, if I'm drawing a map, that's really what I want to see. On that point, thank you all for coming through this session. We said it was afternoon, but it's now evening. And we have had great speakers, friends, And I think pretty much they're friends to us.
Yeah.
And yeah, these have been very amazing conversations from a very interesting perspective, startup and also the government, and hopefully maybe these are lessons that we can actually contribute or maybe carry on as you grow your businesses. And yeah, so we'll just leave it here for now and saying thank you to our guests.
Yeah.
But you're not our guest anymore, but you're part of the company. So yeah, thank you so much for making time, and all the best in your journey.
Thank you for having us.
Cheers.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being a part of this shoot. We can't always forget to shout out those who have stood behind us through this amazing journey. Bongo Hive and its continuous granting us of their facilities, very beautiful grounds. In fact, we were just commending Mulumba for the color of his shirt matching the tone. So unconsciously, I think he even gets that. You know. But seriously, I think this partnership is the stuff of legends that we speak about, and we would want to sincerely thank them for continuously granting us the venue, the timing, the support, the cooperation, and we look forward to long-lasting partnerships like this with them going forward. Thank you, Bongo Hive.